So we have this all stitched and done, and we clipped all our threads on the back so that they won't get caught when we're trying to piece it. Oh, I missed one right there. I will get that. So next step is to add this little thin black border. It goes around, and then we're going to do square and a square blocks. And I'm going to show you how to do those, and we're going to do half square triangles and flying geese. So we have a little bit of everything for you. So we'll get these marked and ready to go, and I will show you the next step. So now we are on to the pieced border for our Sky's the Limit. And we need to make 4 flying geese. We're going to need to make 4 half square triangles, which I'm going to walk you through, and a whole bunch of square and a square blocks. I want to walk you through each of the units and show you how to do it. This is my fake sewing machine. So this is the sewing machine arm, and this is a clearly perfect angle that I've taped down, and then we have a QTools sewing bumper. I have a video on showing you how to put this on your machine and why I use it for all of my sewing, but I'm going to use it today to demo how to do flip and sew. There's 2 different ways to do it. And flip and sew is when you sew a square onto a piece. I'll show you start with the first one. I'm going to sew the smaller square onto the larger square, and then once it's sewn on, you flip it open. Flip and sew. Or sew and flip is more accurate. But there are a couple different ways to do it. I'm going to show you the quick and easy way, and then the way I find to be the most accurate. And you can decide based on your skill level and your need for speed which way you do it. So the first way is you just lay the smaller square onto the larger square. You have a clearly perfect angle on your machine. Some of you may have an angler. That's an older tool that's very similar to this. And what this tool does is it gives us these green lines, which are 45 degrees. They give you a center line between the gray and green, and then they give you a 1/4 inch line, which is the green, which is where I've put this little purple bumper. You can see I can't go past it. So the purple bumper is the QTools sewing edge. The green and white cling is the clearly perfect angle, both of which I will link below. But I have these 2 things on all of my sewing machines because it makes sewing flip and sew and 1/4 inch seams and everything else much more accurate and easier to do. So once you have this applied to your machine, you would align the tip of the smaller square with the center line on your machine, though it would go up under the needle. And if you are going to start up here, you do not have to start right at the end. You can start. Yeah. So when you go to sew this on, you align the 2 pieces, and you're going to start sewing on this end. And when you put it into your machine, you don't need to put the needle right at the end. You can come in like a 32nd of an inch, even an 1/8 of an inch. And it will less likely to chew it up as you sew it into sometimes the ends will get caught down there. So anyway, you're going to sew from there to there. So you're going to sew across the diagonal of the smaller square. This is under the needle. This end is aligned on the center piece of the center line of the clearly perfect angle. And then these lines are all 45 degrees. So you'll see this edge is aligned with the 45, and it should stay that way all the way through the machine as you sew. Therefore, you don't need to mark your squares. This is the way I do it like 85% of the time. It's quick, it's easy, it's pretty accurate. Accurate enough that I will do it and not have any issues. But there is a much more accurate way to do it. It just takes a lot longer. So I'm going to show you that way as well. And that is you mark your square. And the traditional way to mark the square is from point to point. So you just take a ruler and you align it, and you go from point to point and you just draw a line. And then that's the line you would sew on. But when you're marking your squares like that, you're only using these 2 little points in space to try to make sure you're aligned. And if your square isn't cut quite accurate, or you just aren't eyeballing it right, it can go off. And then when you flip it open, it's not very accurate at all. So what I've learned is if you take a ruler, there's 2 rulers I like to use. This is the non-slip multi-size 6-inch Flying Geese and 45 90-degree triangle ruler from Creative Grids. This is great because you can mark squares all the way up to 6.5 inches. Or this is the folded corner clipper from Creative Grids. This one's nice to have because it's little, portable, and when you're marking these little squares, you don't have to fight with the bigger ruler. And how I use this is I align this with my square, and I'm aligning the square end with the horizontal line on the ruler. They give you a vertical line. I'm aligning that. I've aligned the top of the ruler, the side of the ruler, and I've made sure this diagonal is going from corner to corner. So instead of 2 floating points, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points of reference. So when I'm drawing this line, it's accurate. It's where it needs to be. So when you go to sew this on your piece, you lay it on. There are 2 triangles, a little one, big one. You want the little one always pointing out. Little guy is out. And then when you go to sew, this drawn line is not your sewing line. This drawn line is your 1/4 inch seam line. So if you have a 1/4 inch foot, the foot sits on that line. This line goes up to the purple bumper, and you would just sew it through, and then you would get this guy. So he's sewn. This is my sewing line. There's my 1/4 inch line I drew. And you can do opposite corners. We need to put one on all 4 corners, but you'll see they overlap at each point. So I like to sew opposite corners. Then once I have them all sewn, I can line them up on my cutting table, which I'm going to show you with this other one. And I can just use a ruler and a rotary cutter, and I can just cut this away. Now, the other thing you could do is you could flip this up, and if it's not 100% accurate or you are unsure of how accurate it is, you can just cut the center away, leave the background, and then if it's not quite there, you could use this background square as your edge when you sew things in, and this will just get caught in the seam. I tend to cut both layers out because I don't like to have the bulk in my quilt, but there is no right or wrong way to do it. So you can trim it all or trim just the center out. You don't want to leave both layers though, that's too bulky. So once you've done those 2 corners, you're ready to press. And I'm going to get rid of this so I don't forget and have one weird block in my quilt. So when you're ready to press, you take the side of your iron into that seam and just work that seam down. I do not go all the way out to the edge. Only press that seam because you can stretch your fabric. This is how I press 99% of my seams. So there we go. So that's pressed. Now I can take my next 2 squares that are already marked, and I can sew this one on. And then once those are all sewn on, I can sew this one on. Okay, so that would be that one. And I've got that right here, and I want to show you how I trim all of these quickly and easily. I use the lines on my cutting mat, and I align the sewn seam onto one of the lines. And in this case, I can only do one side at a time. I can only align one side. I'm going to cut both sides, but I'm going to line that one side here and here on the line. And then I'm going to stack these up using the bottom line, the sewn line, the top line with that line. Because you got to remember, this is your seam allowance, and it doesn't have to be perfect 1/4 inch. It's inside your quilt. We just need to get rid of the excess fabric, and this is a nice, quick way to do it. At the same time, I am keeping an eye to make sure it should be even on both sides. But you never know, it could have been a weird sewing day, so it's good to also eyeball that side, make sure you're still even. Alright, so once we get a bunch of them lined up, you take a ruler, you put the 1/4 inch line on your sewn seam line, leaving yourself an excess of 1/4 inch fabric, and you just cut all those away. And then on this side, you put the edge of the ruler on the drawn line. That's still a 1/4 inch away from my sewn line. And you get rid of those. And now these guys are all ready to press open to make our square in a square box. So I'm going to repeat those to finish those for the quilt. Next up is the Flying Geese. The Flying Geese are done the exact same way. You have a rectangle and you have 2 squares versus 3, and you sew the first one on, you line it, you mark it the same way. You're sewing from point to point, 1/4 inch goes on the foot. So that's sewn, then you trim your excess and you press that open. And you have to press that open before you put the second square on, trim that away, and press that open. So that's how you do the Flying Geese. And there's only 4 of them in this guy. And then finally, we have to do our half square triangles. And so to do half square triangles, I again use this non-sip multi-size Creative Grids ruler. And I'm using that instead of the folded corner clipper, because this guy is too short. I can't mark this. But this is how I mark half square triangles. I have a lot of different ways I do half square triangles, but in this case we're going to do it the traditional method. And I'm using this ruler, and I'm using the dotted line on the inside of the ruler, not the outer edge. I've always used the outer edge, and now I've realized that the inside line is actually a little more accurate, even more accurate. So what I'm doing is I'm aligning this point up here at the top, right here, that point with the top of my square, and then I'm using the dotted line on the side edge of the square and the diagonal line from corner to corner. And if you can align the bottom one, you do it. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. And I draw a line. This is my sewing line to make a half square triangle. And because we're sewing a 1/4 inch on either side of the center point, I have to turn it around and mark it on this side. And I know you're thinking, oh, well, I could just draw one diagonal line and sew a 1/4 inch on either side. You can, but it's never very accurate to me. So this is much more accurate. Then when I get to the sewing machine, I am sewing on my drawn lines. So I started up here. I'm using the 45s again to align either angle. I sew through until I can see my center point. Then I start following that as well. And I sew that side, turn it around, sew the other side, and you get this. Now we just need to cut it in half, a 1/4 inch away from your sewn line, which is your center line. There we go. And now we have 2 half square triangles. And again, this quilt you're going to press towards the dark. I use the edge of the iron into the seam. And then you do need to get rid of your dog ears, whether you use your rotary cutter or your scissors. You don't want to leave these excess fabric in the corner because they can get caught when you're trying to quilt. It's just some more excess bulk that you don't need there. Alright, so we got all our blocks pressed open, all our flip and sew and our half square triangles are done, and now it's time to put the borders together. So in the pattern, we will give you the layout where all of these blocks are, but if you look, the teal stripe, the teal confetti, and the purple stripe are in the same order here. Then you can flip it over to do this half. You can flip it here and here with a block in the middle. And the top, they're all the same. So I went ahead and I sewed all 3 units into 8 segments. And now we need to press them together, and I want to show you how I make my points match. So first, to make your points match, you would take them, use a pin, you go through the back right at the point where the 2 stitching rows intersect, and then you take it into the point on the other half, and then I straighten it out with my fingers, and then I rock the pin in place. Then when I go to sew, just before I get to the pin, I pull it out. Another way to do it is if you actually just use touch, just feel this align with what's underneath, and make sure your pin, your sewing needle, goes right in that point, and you'll get your points when you sew the rows together. So the next thing is to press these, and I would recommend pressing the seams open because right at this point there's a lot of bulk. But if you press the seam open, you're dividing it evenly between this block and this block versus pushing it all to one side. That being said, for years I did just press it to one side. Doesn't hurt it. It's just, like I said, adds some bulk there. So to press my seams open, I use a strip stick. This is the 9-inch version. We have the 9-inch and 18-inch on the website, so I'll put a link below. But you lay it over the curved side of the stick. The other side is flat. And I use a purple thing, and I just sort of split the seam open with the purple thing. Then I use the nose of my iron, and I just run it down the stick. Because the stick is curved, it helps the two sides flip to either side. It makes it a lot easier to press a seam open than if you do it flat. For years I wouldn't press seams open because I just thought they were a pain, and then I got this stick and I'm like, oh, it's not that bad. So here is, then I press it from the front just to make sure I don't have any fabric rolled in the seam. So there's the first one. So we need to press all 8 units, and then to do the top and bottom borders, you just sew 2 of these together, purple block to purple block. That's the bottom and the top. And to do the side borders, you take 2 of these and 1 of these and sew them, and that'll be your side borders. So then you're ready to sew your borders onto your hot air balloon, and then we have 1 more border at the end. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this finished. And oh, I forgot to tell you, for the top and bottom borders, let's get rid of this for a second. That is your top and bottom border, but you also need to sew a half flying geese on either end and a half square triangle. And that will be your top and bottom border. To do the side borders, like I said, you do sew this guy in the middle, but you would also sew the other 2 remaining flying geese on the end. So, and this is all in the pattern. I just want to kind of go over the highlights in the video. And this is the Sky's the Limit pattern, and I will link that below as well. This is using Radical Rainbow from Hoffman Fabrics. It's quite a fun collection. So anyway, I will get all the borders on, and I'll show you the quilt top before we send it off to be quilted. So I realized as I'm putting my borders together that I misspoke. We need 8 of these, not 4 as I stated earlier. So we're going to go ahead. I knew I had all these little white ones left and I wasn't sure why. Usually it comes out in the end. So I need to make 4 more of these because you need 2 on either side border and you need 2 at the top and the bottom border. So disregard the earlier comment of 4, you need 8. Here is our Sky's the Limit quilt back from the quilter. Monica Chrome quilted this one for us. She did clouds in the, out behind the balloons. She did lines in the balloons itself. And then out here in the border, she did this beautiful custom scroll work. So you can just see it. This gives you a close-up of the fabrics as well. I love the clouds behind the balloons. It really makes it pop. She did a great job with this. Though we tend to do a lot of all-overs, it was really nice to have her do a custom on this to really showcase the applique in the middle. The pattern, Sky's the Limit, is available on our website now, and the fabric will be out soon. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial on applique, flip and sew, and half square triangles. And if you have, make sure you like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, make sure you like and subscribe below. You can find the Whimsical Workshop on our website, thewhimsicalworkshop.com, and that has all links to all of our other social media platforms. Thanks for joining us.